The principal's son bullied the new girl, but her mother's response left the whole town stunned. A new beginning in Pines. The sun had barely risen over the quiet town of Pines when Sophie stepped out of the small car, her eyes scanning the unfamiliar surroundings. The town, nestled in a valley surrounded by rolling hills, looked nothing like the bustling city life she had left behind. Gone were the towering buildings and the sound of honking horns, replaced instead by the stillness of the morning, the chirp of birds and the sight of wide empty streets. "Mom, are you sure this is it?" Sophie asked, her voice heavy with doubt as she stared out the window at the sleepy town. "Lily." Her mother turned her head briefly from the wheel, offering a reassuring smile. She could see the uncertainty in her daughter's eyes, and though she shared some of those same fears, she knew they had made the right choice. It was a fresh start. "Yes, sweetheart, I double-checked everything. The school here is excellent and the people are friendly. Trust me, we'll make it work." Sophie wasn't convinced. She had spent her entire life in the city, the vibrant pulse of it, the fast pace, the crowds of people, and her friends who felt like family. This small town felt like a completely different world, a world she didn't want to be a part of. As they drove through the town's main street, Sophie couldn't help but notice the contrast. Old houses lined the roads. Small businesses dotted the sidewalk, and in the distance a few cows grazed lazily in fields. It was picturesque, almost like something out of a movie, but it wasn't home. It didn't feel like home. The car slowed down as they turned onto a tree-lined road. Their new house came into view. A quaint one-story cottage with a white picket fence and a small garden that looked a little overgrown. Lily pulled into the driveway and parked, cutting the engine. Sophie stepped out slowly, trying to suppress the knot in her stomach. "Well, here we are," Lily said, brightly, trying to sound more upbeat than she felt. She looked over at Sophie, who was still staring at the house. "I know it's not much, but it's ours. We'll make it our home, I promise." Sophie gave a small nod, but it was clear she wasn't yet sold on the idea. As they unpacked the car, Lily caught sight of Sophie's hesitation. She understood it, of course. She knew how hard it was to leave behind everything Sophie had known, her friends, her life in the city, the comfort of familiarity. But Lily couldn't help but feel hopeful. This was their chance for a fresh start. A chance for Sophie to flourish in a place where she wouldn't have to compete with the chaos of city life. After a few minutes of unloading, they headed inside. Sophie walked through the front door and took a deep breath. The smell of fresh paint mixed with the scent of old wood and the sound of their footsteps echoed in the empty house. Sophie's new room was small but cozy, with a view of the backyard and a small window that let in the afternoon sunlight. It wasn't much, but it was hers, and she could already tell that it was going to be a place where she could breathe a little easier. Sophie ran her fingers over the windowsill, gazing out into the garden. She didn't want to admit it, but the place had its charm. The silence, the stillness, it was all so different from what she was used to, but there was a peacefulness to it that for a brief moment made her feel less apprehensive. "Maybe this won't be so bad after all," she muttered to herself. Her thoughts were interrupted by Lily's voice from the hallway. "Hey, I'm going to get us some lunch. You can unpack or relax, you don't have to rush." Sophie smiled weakly, appreciating her mother's effort to make things easier. "Thanks, Mom. I'll be down in a minute." Lily stepped out of the room, leaving Sophie alone in her thoughts. Sophie stared out the window for a while longer, her mind racing with thoughts of the new school, the new town, and the uncertainty that lay ahead. She tried to shake off the dread building in her chest. This was her new life now. She had to find a way to make it work. Later that afternoon, Sophie reluctantly walked to her new school. The building was large and imposing, and Sophie couldn't shake the feeling that she didn't belong. She stood outside the entrance for a moment, watching the other students milling about, chatting in groups. She wasn't used to being the new kid. Back in the city, she'd been surrounded by familiar faces, by people who knew her. Here she was just an outsider. As she walked through the front doors, she felt the eyes of the students on her. They whispered and pointed, and Sophie's cheeks flushed with embarrassment. The murmurs followed her down the hall as she made her way to the office to sign in. It was clear from the moment she stepped foot in that building that she wasn't going to be given a warm welcome. The secretary at the front desk barely looked up as she handed Sophie a form. "You'll find your locker in the third hall," she said in a flat tone, almost disinterested. "Your first class is history. Good luck." Sophie walked down the hallway, clutching her books tightly against her chest. As she approached her locker, she caught sight of a group of girls standing nearby, whispering to each other. One of them, a tall girl with dark hair, gave Sophie a quick once-over and then turned to her friends, snickering. Sophie felt her stomach twist. She couldn't help but wonder what they were saying about her. It was the first taste of what she knew was to come. The feeling of being different, of not fitting in. She had been the new girl before, but never in a place like this where people seemed determined to make her feel like an outsider. Little did she know this was just the beginning. Sophie would soon find out that the worst bully in the school wasn't just one of the girls. It was James, the principal's son, who had a reputation for ruling the school with an iron fist, and it was only a matter of time before he set his sights on her. The first day of school, Sophie sat quietly in her new history class, feeling every pair of eyes on her. The teacher, Mr. Walker, stood at the front writing the day's agenda on the board, but Sophie couldn't focus on what he was saying. Her thoughts kept drifting to the other students, whispering and giggling under their breaths as she sat at the back of the classroom. She had hoped for a smooth first day, but it seemed that this small town had its own rules and she had to learn them the hard way. From the moment she stepped inside, Sophie had felt the tension, like she was being judged for just showing up. She noticed a group of girls in the front row who looked at her with a mix of curiosity and disdain. It didn't help that Sophie was used to the city's fast pace and fashion, and she had quickly realized that her city clothes made her stand out in the small town where people preferred simple styles. But what bothered Sophie the most wasn't the stares. It was the sneers from James, the school principal's son. He was sitting near the front, whispering to his friends, shooting her an occasional glance with a look of pure disdain. Sophie couldn't put her finger on it, but there was something about James that set her on edge. His arrogance was palpable, and it was clear that he thought he was untouchable. James had been the talk of the school for years. His father, the principal, ran the show, and James had a reputation of being the golden boy, the one who could do no wrong. He had the looks, the charm, and the power that came with being the principal's son. And now it seemed he had a new target. Sophie. She tried to ignore him, focusing on the lesson, but James wasn't done with her yet. During the break between classes, he and his friends made their move. Sophie had just finished gathering her books when she heard footsteps behind her. Well, look at the new girl. A voice sneered. It was James. Sophie turned to find him standing in front of her, his arms crossed over his chest. He had a smug look on his face, his friends circling around him like vultures. I hear you're from the city. That must mean you're smarter than all of us, right? Sophie bit her lip, refusing to let her frustration show. I never said that, she replied, trying to stay calm. James leaned in closer, his breath hot against her face. You think you're better than us, don't you, coming here and showing off your fancy city clothes? You must think you're too good for Pines. Sophie's heart raced. She wanted to say something, but the words wouldn't come. She didn't want to make it worse, so she turned to leave, hoping to escape the confrontation, but James was quick to block her way. Going somewhere? He taunted. Sophie took a deep breath, looking at him with determination. Just move, she said quietly, her voice trembling slightly, but James didn't move. Instead, he smirked and pushed her shoulder, making her stumble backward. Sophie caught herself just in time, her hands gripping the edge of a nearby desk to steady herself. The class had started to gather around, watching the scene unfold. Sophie's face burned with embarrassment, and just when she thought it couldn't get worse, she heard the bell ring for the next class. She quickly grabbed her bag, but James wasn't done with her yet. You should know your place, city girl, he called out as she walked away. We don't need any show-offs here. Sophie's hands clenched into fists, but she didn't turn around. She couldn't, she had to keep walking. She couldn't afford to let him see how much he had affected her. Later that day, Sophie couldn't shake off the interaction. Every time she tried to focus on the lessons, her mind wandered back to James and his taunts. She knew she would have to face him again, and the thought made her stomach churn. When the school day finally ended, Sophie rushed home, feeling the weight of the day on her shoulders. As she opened the door to their new house, Lily was there waiting for her with a bright smile. How was your first day? Lily asked, her voice filled with hope. Sophie smiled weakly, trying to mask her emotions. It was fine, she said. But it wasn't fine. It had been a nightmare. Lily looked at her daughter with concern. You sure? You don't seem fine. Sophie hesitated, unsure whether to tell her mother the truth. She didn't want to worry her, but the memory of James's taunting was too fresh, too raw. Finally, Sophie couldn't hold it in any longer. Mom, they're bullying me, James and his friends. They won't leave me alone. Lily's face hardened. What do you mean? What are they doing to you? Sophie recounted the incidents, from the taunts in class to the physical intimidation in the hallway. I don't know why they're doing it, Mom. I haven't done anything to them. I just want to fit in. Lily took a deep breath, trying to process what her daughter had just said. The protective mother in her wanted to march down to the school and confront James, but she knew that wasn't the right approach. She needed to help Sophie handle this in a way that would empower her, not make the situation worse. We're going to figure this out, Lily said firmly, her voice full of determination. No one has the right to treat you like that, and you won't let them get to you. You're stronger than this. Sophie nodded, though her heart still felt heavy. The idea of standing up to James felt impossible. How could she? He was the principal's son and everyone knew that meant he could get away with anything. That night, as Sophie lay in bed, she tried to push the thoughts of James out of her mind. She knew her mom would do everything she could to protect her, but she didn't know how to protect herself from someone like James. Little did she know, Lily wasn't going to let this slide. She had her own way of dealing with people like James, and it was one that would leave the whole town stunned. A mother's response. Lily stood in the kitchen the next morning, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee filling the air. But her thoughts were elsewhere. She had barely slept the night before, turning over what Sophie had said about the bullying, replaying each word, each moment that made her daughter's heart ache. She wasn't going to stand by and let this continue. As Sophie finished her breakfast, Lily's resolve strengthened. "Sophie," she began softly, her tone calm but firm. "Today we're going to take action. You're not going back to that school to face that kind of treatment without anyone doing something about it. You deserve better than that." Sophie looked up, her eyes wide with a mixture of relief and anxiety. "What are we going to do, Mom?" Lily gave her daughter a reassuring smile. "We're going to show them what happens when you mess with the wrong person." Sophie wasn't sure what her mother meant, but something in Lily's voice made her feel a glimmer of hope. She hadn't seen her mother this determined before, and it made her feel a bit braver too. Later that morning, after Sophie was off to school, Lily set her plan into motion. She knew she had to approach this carefully, but she wasn't going to let anyone think that bullying was acceptable, not even if that person was the principal's son. Lily arrived at the school just after the bell rang, walking confidently through the front doors. Her presence was enough to turn heads, but she ignored the stares. This wasn't about her. This was about Sophie and making sure she was safe. She walked directly to the principal's office, her heels clicking with purpose against the polished floor. Inside the office, Mr. Hastings, the principal, looked up from his desk, his expression neutral but clearly surprised by the visit. "Can I help you, Mrs. Harris?" he asked, his voice polite but distant, the way he spoke to every parent. Lily didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I'm here to talk about my daughter, Sophie," she said, her voice steady. "She's been the target of bullying at this school, specifically from your son, James." The words hung in the air, and for a brief moment Mr. Hastings didn't know how to respond. His eyes flickered toward the door, as if considering whether he should ask Lily to leave or try to minimize the situation, but Lily didn't let him. She stepped forward, her presence dominating the room. "I don't need you to tell me that this is normal for kids. It's not. My daughter is being tormented, and as the principal, it's your responsibility to stop it." And Mr. Hastings shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Mrs. Harris, I understand your concerns, but James is a good student, and it's possible your daughter is misunderstanding some of the interactions. He's never been in trouble before, and children sometimes—" "Stop!" Lily cut him off, her voice growing sharper. "You can't protect him just because he's your son. If he's the one causing harm, then you need to hold him accountable just like you would any other student." There was a long silence between them as Mr. Hastings looked down at his hands, trying to figure out what to say. Finally, he spoke. "I'll talk to James. I'll make sure he understands the seriousness of this." Lily shook her head, her frustration palpable. "No, it's not just a talk you need to have with him. It's about consequences, and I'm not leaving until I know what those are." "Oh." Mr. Hastings' face turned red. His usual calm demeanor began to crack as he realized Lily wasn't going to back down. He stared at her for a moment, then sighed deeply. "Fine. I'll arrange a meeting with James, his teachers, and you, but I need you to understand. This isn't an easy situation. It's complicated." "Complicated?" Lily repeated, narrowing her eyes. "What's complicated is allowing a bully to run rampant just because of his last name. My daughter is a human being, not a target. You'll fix this, and you'll fix it today." With that, Lily stood up and walked toward the door, leaving Mr. Hastings with little more than a stunned look on his face. The principal, who had prided himself on being a man of authority, found himself on the defensive for the first time. He had been challenged by a mother who wasn't going to let her child be anyone's victim. As Lily stepped out of the office, she felt a surge of empowerment. She had made her point. Now it was time for the next step. She dialed a number on her phone, knowing the next part of her plan was crucial. It was time to involve someone who could help her make sure the whole town understood that bullying had consequences, no matter who you were. Meanwhile, back at the school, James was feeling confident. He had no idea that his life was about to be turned upside down. He had been used to getting his way, whether it was picking on the new kid or getting special treatment from his father. But as Lily walked out of the school, the stage was set for a confrontation that would shake the foundation of the town. The real shock was yet to come. The unexpected consequences. After her heated confrontation with Mr. Hastings, Lily felt a mix of exhaustion and triumph. She had done what needed to be done, but now the hard part began waiting. As she left the principal's office, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The school day had just started, and the tension was already building. When Lily arrived home, Sophie was sitting on the couch staring blankly at the TV. The news report was running in the background, but Sophie wasn't paying attention. She looked up when her mother entered the room, her face filled with both hope and fear. "Did you talk to him?" Sophie asked, her voice trembling slightly. Lily smiled reassuringly, though her heart raced in her chest. "I did. I told him exactly what needed to be done. You won't have to deal with this anymore, Sophie. I promise you." Sophie's eyes filled with tears and she rushed into her mother's arms. Thank you, Mom," she whispered, burying her face in Lily's shoulder. I didn't know how much longer I could take it." Lily stroked her daughter's hair gently, holding her tightly. "I know, sweetheart, but you're stronger than you think, and we're going to make sure this never happens again." Meanwhile, in the school, the day took a sharp turn. James Hastings, the principal's son, had no idea what was coming. He was used to walking through the halls like he owned them. His friends, the ones who always laughed at his jokes and mimicked his behavior, had stayed silent when he'd made fun of Sophie. He never considered the consequences of his actions. After all, his father was the principal. But when the bell rang for lunch and he walked into the cafeteria, everything felt different. He was met with a strange silence. His usual group of friends didn't wave him over to sit with them. In fact, a few students were eyeing him warily as if something had changed. He felt a sudden unease settle in his stomach. "What's going on?" James muttered under his breath as he scanned the room. His eyes landed on Sophie sitting with a few other girls at a table, looking perfectly at ease. She was talking and laughing with them, her face glowing with something James hadn't seen before. Peace. Sophie's new confidence wasn't just a result of her mother's protection. It was something deeper. It was the feeling of no longer being afraid, of knowing that someone had her back no matter what. She looked over at James, and for a brief moment their eyes locked. There was no anger in her gaze, no fear, just quiet resolve. James shifted uncomfortably and turned to his best friend Trevor, who had also noticed the shift in the air. "What's going on with everyone?" James asked, his voice low, but Trevor just shrugged. "You didn't hear," Trevor said, his voice tinged with unease. "Your dad had a meeting with Mrs. Harris, Sophie's mom. I think she made some demands." James felt his heart drop. He had no idea what that could mean. Was his father involved in this? He never once imagined that his actions could lead to such a big mess. Later that afternoon, Lily received a call from the school. She knew it wasn't going to be a pleasant conversation, but she answered the phone with a calm resolve. "Mrs. Harris," the voice on the other end said, "this is Principal Hastings. I've scheduled a meeting with you and James. We'd like to resolve this matter as quickly as possible." Lily's blood ran cold, but she didn't hesitate. "I'll be there. I expect more than just words this time." When the meeting was scheduled for the following day, Lily showed up with a determination in her eyes. Sophie had asked her mother to let her attend the meeting, but Lily, knowing how hurt and vulnerable Sophie still was, decided it would be best for her to stay home and rest. At the school, James walked into the office with a sense of impending doom. His dad had been giving him a long, disappointed speech all morning about the importance of treating others with respect. But the words didn't sink in. Not yet. When James entered the principal's office, he saw Lily sitting across from Mr. Hastings, her posture stiff and unwavering. The tension in the room was palpable. Lily's eyes flicked to James when he entered, and he froze under her gaze. It was nothing like the sympathetic looks the other teachers gave him when he misbehaved. Her eyes were sharp, calculating, as if she could see straight through him. James sat down slowly, nervously. He wasn't used to being intimidated like this, but for the first time, he wasn't sure what to expect. His father's usual sternness didn't offer any comfort in this situation. He was in real trouble. The meeting began with Mr. Hastings attempting to calm the room. "We're here to find a way forward," he said, his voice authoritative but lacking any real conviction. "James, I'm sure we can all move past this." Lily's gaze didn't soften. "I'm not here for moving past this," she said, her voice firm. "What happened to my daughter? What your son did was nothing short of cruel. I expect action, not apologies." James shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his father's disapproving look weighing heavily on him. He felt the heat rise in his chest. He wasn't used to being spoken to like this. Mr. Hastings looked between his son and Lily, visibly uncomfortable. "James, this isn't just a little misunderstanding," he said, his voice wavering slightly. "Your actions have consequences, and I need you to understand that." Lily leaned forward slightly, her gaze piercing through James. You're going to understand it now, James. You're going to take responsibility for the pain you've caused. You owe Sophie an apology, and you owe this school a change." For the first time, James felt a deep sense of regret. His usual bravado was gone. In that moment, he realized the truth of what his actions had cost him. It wasn't just Sophie he had hurt, it was the entire atmosphere at school and even his own standing in the community. What would happen next would determine who he really was. James stared at the floor, his shoulders slumping as he finally spoke. I'm sorry," he muttered. "It wasn't much, but it was a start." Lily's expression softened just slightly. "That's the first step. Now let's make sure it counts." The tipping point. The next morning after the confrontation with James, Lily was still shaken by how things had escalated. She had hoped for a more profound change, a moment of real accountability that would make everything right. But as she sat at home in her quiet living room, it became clear to her that words alone wouldn't solve this. She had witnessed the discomfort in James's apology, but that discomfort wasn't enough. It was a step, yes, but it was not enough to undo the damage done to Sophie's spirit. Lily wasn't the type to sit idly by when it came to her daughter's well-being. She had to act. By the time Sophie arrived home from school later that afternoon, her demeanor was noticeably different. She was quieter, more withdrawn, her eyes heavy with an emotion that Lily couldn't quite place. It didn't take long for her to find out that her daughter had experienced another round of bullying that day. This time at lunch, the same group of kids who had tormented Sophie earlier were back at it. Their cruelty had intensified, fueled by a false sense of power. Sophie had tried to stand up for herself, but in that moment she was outnumbered. Sophie tried to hide the hurt in her voice as she spoke about the incident, but Lily could see the cracks forming in her daughter's heart. She knew her daughter's spirit was fragile and was breaking under the weight of it all. The sight of her daughter's pain lit a fire within Lily, a fire that burned away any doubts she had about what she needed to do next. The school had failed to address the issue seriously, and it was clear that James, the principal, wasn't committed to taking the necessary steps. It was time for Lily to take matters into her own hands. Lily's decision was swift and resolute. She knew that this wouldn't be just about confronting the students who bullied Sophie. No, it was about confronting a larger problem, a culture that allowed such behavior to persist. It was time to go beyond the confines of the principal's office. Lily wouldn't settle for just a polite apology. She was going to change the system itself. She was determined that the school, the town, and everyone who had been complicit in this toxic culture would know that she wouldn't back down. With a plan in mind, Lily didn't wait. She immediately reached out to a few parents she knew who had also experienced bullying, both for their children and for themselves. She wanted to build a coalition of concerned, passionate parents who were tired of seeing their children suffer in silence. She also made calls to local media outlets, aware that this issue was bigger than her family. She needed to bring attention to the behavior that had been allowed to fester for far too long. The following morning, Lily arrived at the school early. She had already informed James that she was coming in to speak with him again. This time, however, her approach was different. She didn't want to be polite, and she didn't want to be ignored. She had no intention of leaving until things changed. When she walked into James's office, he was caught off guard by the determined look in her eyes. He could tell this wasn't the same woman who had walked into his office just a few days ago. This woman was prepared for battle. "James," Lily started, her voice calm, but unwavering. "I'm not here to discuss another apology. This is bigger than Sophie, bigger than just our family. The culture in this school is broken, and until that is addressed, nothing will change." James shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He tried to respond, but Lily didn't give him the chance. "I'm not just here for my daughter," she continued, her voice growing more firm. "I'm here for every child in this school who feels like they don't have a voice. And if you don't take this seriously, I'll make sure the whole town knows about the bullying that's been allowed to happen under your watch." Lily's words echoed in the room as she left the principal's office. This time she wasn't walking away empty-handed. She had made a promise to herself and to Sophie that she would fight for what was right. Later that afternoon, she gathered with the other concerned parents. Together, they formed a coalition dedicated to ensuring that every child was safe in school, regardless of their background, appearance, or abilities. Lily wasn't just advocating for her own child anymore. She was advocating for change, a change that the school desperately needed. Word spread quickly, and soon the school was forced to act. The town couldn't ignore Lily's voice, and it was clear that something had to be done. The next few days were filled with meetings, discussions, and some tense moments. But Lily didn't falter. The bullying couldn't continue, and she would make sure of it. At the next school assembly, James stood before the students, his demeanor now much more serious than before. He addressed the issue head-on, admitting the school's failures and pledging to implement new anti-bullying programs and strategies. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. The students, including Sophie's bullies, had to face the consequences of their actions, and Lily was there standing proud knowing she had done what was necessary. Sophie, although still dealing with the aftermath of her experience, began to feel a sense of relief. Her mother had taken action, she had stood up for her, and Sophie was no longer the only one bearing the weight of the bullying. She had a community of people who would fight for her just as Lily had fought for her. The town, once indifferent to the issue, now found itself facing a much-needed reckoning. Lily had made sure of that, and though the road ahead wouldn't be easy, she knew that it was worth it. For Sophie and for all the children who deserved to be seen, heard, and protected. The days after Lily's confrontation with Principal James were filled with an unexpected sense of momentum. Things at school seemed to have calmed down, with Sophie no longer the target of constant ridicule. The bullying, although not entirely eradicated, had lost some of its power thanks to the Parents' Coalition and the school's new anti-bullying measures. Sophie had started to feel a slight sense of relief, but the peace was fragile and Sophie couldn't shake off the nagging feeling that something was still off. She often found herself lost in thought, wondering if the change in the school's atmosphere was genuine or if the bullying was simply lying dormant, waiting for the right moment to resurface. Sophie had never fully trusted the situation at school, even though her mother had assured her that things would improve. One Friday afternoon, after the bell rang and the school day ended, Sophie was hanging around in the hallway waiting for her mom to pick her up. She was deep in thought, her gaze lowered to the floor as she absent-mindedly watched the students around her. It had been a quiet day. Too quiet, and Sophie couldn't help but feel uneasy. As she was about to turn a corner, she overheard a conversation between a group of students, something she wasn't meant to hear. They were standing near the lockers, laughing as they chatted. Sophie froze in her tracks, the sound of her name catching her attention. "Did you hear the latest one?" Girl whispered, her voice full of mockery. Sophie recognized her immediately. It was Kate, the girl who had taunted her in literature class when she first arrived. About Sophie. "McFadden, you mean the city girl?" Another voice piped up, followed by a burst of laughter. Sophie felt her heart race and she instinctively stepped back, hiding behind the lockers to avoid being seen. She didn't want to hear this, she didn't want to know. But the conversation continued. "She thinks she's so special, I bet her mom came here to find a man," Kate said, and the group of kids erupted into giggles. Sophie's stomach churned and her face flushed with embarrassment. What did they mean? But the conversation didn't stop. The words that followed cut through her like a knife. "You know what they say about her mom, right? A boy named Drew, the same boy who had made her life miserable, said, 'Her mom's a real attention seeker. She's been making eyes at every man in this town. She's just here for the money. That's why she's acting like she's so nice to get on everyone's good side. She probably thinks she can land some rich guy in this little town.'" A cold, sinking feeling settled in Sophie's chest. Her hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the locker, trying to hold herself steady. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Was this what they really thought of her mom and Sophie? "Poor thing," Drew continued, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "She's just a result of that scheme. Her mom probably doesn't even care about her. She's just a pawn in Lily's game. I bet she's trying to get Sophie into some fancy school here so she can impress people. It's all about the image." Sophie couldn't move. She was rooted to the spot, the weight of their words suffocating her. It was as if the world had come crashing down around her. All this time, she had believed that her mother's love and support would shield her. But now the rumors that had circulated about Lily, about the way people viewed her, were threatening everything. The laughter continued, but Sophie no longer heard it. Instead, she stood there overwhelmed by the shock of it all. The hurt was palpable. It wasn't just about the bullying anymore. It wasn't even just about her classmates. It was about her mother, the one person who had always been there for her, being dragged through the mud by gossip and false assumptions. Her mind raced with questions. Why were people so quick to judge her mother? Why were they targeting Lily when all she had ever done was show kindness and fight for her daughter's future? Sophie's confusion quickly turned into anger, a sharp feeling of betrayal gnawing at her insides. This wasn't just bullying. This was something deeper. This was a personal attack on everything her mother had worked for, everything they had fought for. Sophie didn't even notice when the group of students had left. She was still standing there, her chest tight with emotion, her heart pounding in her ears. It took a moment for her to gather herself. But when she finally turned the corner and saw her mom waiting for her in the parking lot, a storm of emotions hit her all at once. Lily smiled when she saw Sophie approach, but as she looked closer, she noticed the shift in her daughter's posture. Sophie was walking slower than usual, her eyes downcast, and she was avoiding Lily's gaze. "Sweetheart, is everything okay?" Lily asked, her voice laced with concern as she reached out to touch Sophie's shoulder. Sophie flinched slightly, the weight of the day's events overwhelming her. She couldn't keep it inside anymore. Without thinking, she blurted it out. "Mom, why do they hate us so much?" Sophie's voice trembled, and her eyes welled up with tears. They say things about you. Terrible things about us." Lily's heart sank as she saw the pain in her daughter's eyes. She knew something had been bothering Sophie. But hearing her speak the words out loud hit Lily harder than she expected. She took Sophie into her arms, holding her close. "Who said those things?" Lily whispered, her voice thick with emotion, though she was careful not to let Sophie see how deeply the accusations affected her. "It doesn't matter, Mom," Sophie replied softly, her voice shaky. "But they said you were only here to find a man, that we're nothing more than a game for you." Lily's face paled at the revelation. She had known that people in small towns often made assumptions about outsiders, but hearing it from Sophie's perspective, the one person she had worked so hard to protect, was unbearable. Sophie looked up at her mother, tears falling freely. "Now I just don't get it. Why are they so cruel? What have we done to deserve this?" Lily held Sophie tightly, fighting back the tears of her own. She knew that Sophie didn't deserve this pain. None of them did. They had both fought so hard to find peace and build a better life, and now it seemed like the world was conspiring to tear it all down. But Lily was resolute. She would not let this destroy her family. She would not let her daughter be torn apart by lies and hatred. Not now, not ever. "Listen to me, Sophie," Lily said, her voice firm but gentle. "What they say doesn't define us. It never has, and it never will. You and I are stronger than they could ever understand." Sophie nodded, her grip tightening on her mother's hand. But deep down, she knew the battle was far from over. The cruelty they faced wasn't just coming from her classmates, it was coming from the heart of the town itself. The rumors that painted Lily in a light that was completely untrue. And while the town may not have realized it yet, it was about to change. This wasn't just about Sophie anymore, this was about Lily too, and Sophie knew one thing for sure. No matter how many rumors, no matter how many bullies, no one would ever break their bond, and soon the whole town would see just how powerful that bond was. The turning point. The following week, Sophie couldn't shake the events that had transpired. The cruelty of her classmates and the harsh words she had overheard about her mother weighed heavily on her heart. It felt like the world had turned against them. And no matter how hard she tried to block it out, the whispers of gossip continued to haunt her at school. But something inside Sophie had shifted. The sadness and anger that had built up inside her over the past few days had transformed into a burning desire to do something. Something that would change not just her life but her mother's as well. She wasn't going to sit idly by and let people tear her family apart. She wouldn't allow her mother to suffer from the lies and rumors that had been cast up in them. When Sophie returned home that afternoon, she found her mother in the kitchen humming softly to herself as she prepared dinner. The sight of Lily, so determined and strong despite everything they had been through, made Sophie's heart swell with both pride and frustration. How could anyone treat her like this? How could anyone hurt the person who had given everything for her? Without a second thought, Sophie walked into the kitchen, her mind made up. She had to take action. She had to stand up for herself, for Lily. "Mom," Sophie said, her voice firmer than it had been in days, "I'm not going to take this anymore. I'm going to do something about the bullying. I can't let them keep treating us like this." Lily she said had been focused on slicing vegetables, looked up, surprised by the determination in her daughter's voice. She wiped her hands on a towel and turned to face her. "Sophie, sweetheart, I know it's hard. I know it feels like the whole town is against us right now, but I don't want you to get caught up in all this negativity. We came here to escape those kinds of problems," Lily said gently, her face softening with concern. "I just want you to focus on your studies, on building a better future for yourself." But Sophie shook her head. "I know you just want to protect me, but I can't sit by and watch this happen. I can't just let them get away with it. They're hurting you too. They're spreading lies about you, and it's not fair." Lily's heart ached as she saw the fierce determination in Sophie's eyes. She wanted to protect her, to shield her from all the cruelty that life had thrown their way, but she also knew that Sophie was strong, far stronger than she had given her credit for. "I've been talking to some of the other parents," Lily said after a long pause, as if weighing her words. "I'm trying to build some support from them. I'm not sure what else I can do." Sophie's eyes brightened. "That's it. Mom, what if we bring this to the whole town? What if we organize a meeting, a kind of open forum? We'll invite everyone. teachers, parents, even the students. They need to hear the truth. The real truth about you and about me. They need to see that we're not the villains they've made us out to be. Lily frowned slightly, her brow furrowing with concern. But are you sure, Sophie? Are you ready for that? It's not just about standing up for yourself. It's about challenging the entire town. It's going to be tough. Sophie nodded, determination in her voice. I'm ready, Mom. I'm not going to let anyone get away with bullying us anymore. We deserve to be heard. We deserve to be treated with respect. Lily hesitated for a moment, unsure of the full weight of Sophie's decision, but when she looked into her daughter's eyes filled with hope, courage, and the kind of strength Lily had always dreamed Sophie would possess, she knew there was no turning back. All right, Lily said finally, her voice resolute. Let's do it. We'll make them see who we really are. Together. Sophie's idea began to take shape. Over the next few days, she and Lily worked tirelessly on a plan to gather the entire community. They would send out invitations to the school, to local businesses, and to the parents of the children in Sophie's class. They would use this gathering to share their side of the story, to tell the truth about what had been happening in school, and to confront the bullying head-on. But Sophie knew it wouldn't be easy. She knew that the kids who had been tormenting her, led by Drew, wouldn't go down without a fight. The hard part wouldn't be getting people to listen, it would be getting them to believe. The rumors about her mom, about their life, had spread like wildfire, and there was no telling how many people had already formed their opinions. Still, Sophie pressed on, determined to make sure that her mother's name would be cleared. And as the days passed, more and more people began to take notice. Lily had reached out to a few of the parents, and while some were hesitant, others were willing to give them a chance. The day of the town meeting arrived, and Sophie's heart raced as she stood at the front of the school hall. It was a large room with rows of chairs set up for everyone who had been invited. The air was thick with anticipation. A sense of tension hung in the air, and Sophie could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on her. Lily stood beside her, her hand resting on Sophie's shoulder. The two of them had prepared their speech, but they both knew that what was said here today would change everything. This was their chance to set things right. As more people filed into the hall, Sophie's nerves only grew. She knew this was her moment to speak out, to reclaim her voice, and with her mother beside her, she felt stronger than she had in a long time. When the last of the chairs were filled and the room had settled into a hush, Lily took the microphone. Her voice was steady, but Sophie could hear the quiet strength in her words as she began. Thank you all for coming today. My name is Lily McFadden, and I'm here with my daughter Sophie. We've come to talk about something that has been weighing heavily on our hearts. It's about the treatment that my daughter has been enduring here at this school and the way our family has been unfairly judged. This town has a lot of rumors, and we want to clear the air once and for all. Sophie took a deep breath as she stepped forward, feeling the weight of the room on her shoulders. She could sense the skepticism in some of the faces staring back at her, but she wasn't going to let that stop her. We came here to find a new life. Sophie began, her voice ringing out clear and true. A life away from the cruelty and the judgment that we experienced in the city. But instead of finding peace, we've been met with bullying and lies. And it's time for that to stop. The room was silent as Sophie continued. I'm here to tell you that my mother is not the person you think she is. She didn't come here to find a man. She came here to build a better life for me. She came here to be the good person, a good mother, and to give me the life that she never had. So I'm asking you all to stop the rumors, stop the hate, stop the bullying. As Sophie spoke, she could feel her anger and frustration boiling over, but she remained composed. I've been tormented not because of who I am, but because of who they think I am. It's not fair and it needs to stop. The room was still, then slowly, one by one, people began to nod in agreement. Sophie's words had struck a chord with them. She turned to her mother, whose face was filled with pride and love. Together, they had opened the door to something bigger than they could have imagined. And this was just the beginning. The unforeseen consequences. The atmosphere in the room remained thick with tension. As Sophie finished her speech, the weight of her words hung in the air, and for the first time since their arrival, she felt a glimmer of hope. She looked out across the audience, noticing the conflicted expressions on the faces of both parents and students. Some were clearly uncomfortable, while others appeared genuinely moved by her words, but there was one thing Sophie couldn't ignore: Drew. Drew sat near the back of the room, arms crossed and a scowl firmly planted on his face. He glared at Sophie, his resentment palpable. Sophie's heart pounded in her chest as she wondered how he would react. Would he continue to play the role of the class bully, or would he listen? Would he finally see her as more than just the city girl who had ruined everything? Sophie could feel the tension in the room shift, and for a moment it seemed like time had frozen. Then Drew stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor, drawing everyone's attention. The room went quiet. Sophie's breath hitched in her throat. This was it, the moment she had been dreading. Drew looked directly at her, his face a mixture of anger and confusion. "So, you're the victim now, huh? He sneered. "Just because you're different doesn't mean you get to play the martyr card. You think your mother is some kind of saint. The whole town is talking about her. She's nothing but a gold digger looking to find a rich man to take care of her and her kid." Sophie felt the sting of his words and her heart dropped. On the same lies, the same rumors. It seemed like no matter what she did, Drew would never change. But Sophie wasn't going to back down this time. But before she could respond, her mother Lily stepped forward, her face a mask of calm determination. "Drew," she said, her voice steady and unwavering, "you have no idea what you're talking about. I've worked harder than anyone to get to where I am today. I'm not here to take advantage of anyone. I'm here because I wanted a better life for Sophie and for myself, and no amount of gossip or cruelty will ever change that." The room was dead silent as Drew took a step back, his gaze flickering between Sophie and her mother. The anger in his eyes was still there, but something else had shifted. For the first time, there was doubt. Sophie could hardly believe what she was seeing. Drew, the boy who had tormented her for months, was actually starting to listen. It was as though her mother's words had hit him in a way that nothing else had. But just as Sophie thought the tension would break, the school principal, Mr. Williams, walked into the room. His presence immediately changed the dynamic, and his cold eyes scanned the room with authority. "Lily, Sophie," Mr. Williams began, his tone detached. "I understand you're upset, but you're making a scene. This is a school, not a place for personal grievances. Drew, I don't think we need to escalate things any further." Sophie felt the weight of his words hit her hard. She wanted to scream to let him know that this wasn't just a scene, this was her life, but she bit her tongue. She couldn't let him derail everything they had worked for. Lily stepped forward again, her voice cutting through the tension. "This is not about making a scene, Mr. Williams. This is about standing up for what's right. It's about giving my daughter the dignity she deserves, and making sure this bullying ends once and for all. If you won't take action, we will. This school is supposed to protect students, not let them suffer in silence." Mr. Williams looked between the two women, clearly caught off guard. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, Drew spoke up again, his voice softer this time. I didn't mean it like that." He mumbled, his voice barely audible. He avoided eye contact with Sophie, his cheeks flushed with shame. "I was just angry. Because everyone was talking about you and your mom. I guess I was just upset that you came here and everyone was treating you like you were different. I thought it made me look bad." Sophie blinked, surprised. She had never expected an apology, let alone one that felt genuine. Drew's confession hung in the air, and for a moment everything felt oddly quiet. "You don't need to apologize to me, Drew," Sophie said quietly, her voice firm but kind. "I just want to move on. I want us to all move on. And I want you to know that my mom's not here to take anything from anyone. She's just trying to build a life for us, and we don't need to be treated like this anymore." Drew nodded, still looking down, but there was something in his expression that suggested he was beginning to understand, or at least starting to feel the weight of the reality Sophie and Lily were living. The tension in the room was palpable, but something had shifted. The bullying wasn't over. Not by a long shot, but at that moment it felt like a small victory. Sophie had stood up for herself and for her mother, and while the battle wasn't over, it felt like the first step toward making things right. The meeting ended soon after, but the effects of what had transpired lingered in the air. Sophie couldn't help but feel like a weight had been lifted from her shoulder, even though she knew the path ahead would still be challenging. Drew had apologized, but she knew that would take time to fully sink in for him and for the others who had been involved in the bullying. On the way home, Sophie sat beside her mother in the car, feeling an unfamiliar sense of relief. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she finally felt like she had control over her own story, and Lily, for the first time in weeks, allowed herself a smile. She had fought for her daughter, and she had done so without hesitation. But now, for the first time, she could see that their lives in Pines were starting to shift, that things were starting to change in big and small ways. A fresh start awaits. The week that followed the meeting was filled with tension, but also a sense of quiet anticipation. Sophie couldn't shake the feeling that things were beginning to change. The school was quieter than it had been in months, and while the occasional whisper still followed her in the hallways, there was a new sense of respect. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Drew in particular seemed to have backed off. While he didn't openly apologize to Sophie in front of everyone, he began to make an effort, offering her notes in class when she was absent, holding the door open for her in the halls. It was subtle, but Sophie could feel the shift. She wasn't sure if he was doing it out of guilt or if it was genuine, but she appreciated the change nonetheless. She didn't expect miracles, but the simple acts of kindness were enough to begin the process of healing. Lily, on the other hand, found herself facing new challenges. The gossip surrounding her and Sophie still lingered in town, particularly among the older residents. They whispered about her city origins and the rumors about her relationship with Colton. Some, like Tabitha, still found ways to criticize her at every opportunity, but Tyra remained resolute. She knew the truth, and that was all that mattered. One afternoon, as Sophie was heading to the library after school, she noticed Drew waiting by the steps. It was the first time she'd seen him outside of class in a while. His usual tough exterior seemed to be gone, replaced with an almost nervous energy. "Hey, Sophie," he called out, surprising her. She paused, unsure of what to expect. Drew had always been unpredictable, and after everything that had happened, she wasn't sure if she could trust his intentions. "Hi, Drew," Sophie replied, trying to sound calm. She didn't want to appear standoffish, but she wasn't ready to jump into any conversation with him just yet. Drew hesitated, kicking a rock with his foot before looking up at her. I just wanted to say I'm sorry for everything, for the way I treated you. I was wrong, and I've been thinking about it a lot." Sophie felt her breath catch. She wasn't expecting this. She had prepared herself to move on from the situation, but now hearing him say the words, she felt a sense of relief. She had never expected Drew to actually come forward with an apology. "Thank you," Sophie said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I appreciate it. I know it's not easy to admit when you're wrong." Drew nodded, looking down at the ground again. "I guess I've been a bit of an idiot, huh? I let all the rumors and crap get to me, but that's not who I want to be. I don't want to be that person anymore." Sophie felt a flicker of something, empathy perhaps for Drew. The realization that he was struggling just like she had was hard to ignore. She couldn't help but feel a little sorry for him. He had been trying to fit into a mold that didn't suit him. A mold that was filled with anger and resentment, and like her, he had been shaped by the things people said about him. "Well, we can't change the past," Sophie said, offering him a small smile. "But we can try to make the future better." Drew met her gaze, a reluctant smile forming on his face. "Yeah, I think I'd like that." The tension between them seemed to dissipate, and for the first time, Sophie felt like there was a chance for things to be different. Not just with Drew, but with everyone. Oh, her life in Pines was far from perfect, but maybe it didn't need to be. Maybe this was the beginning of something new. A new chapter where she could truly find her place. Later that week, Colton showed up at Sophie and Lily's house, his car pulling up the driveway with an unexpected squeal of tires. Sophie had grown accustomed to his visits, but this one felt different. There was something about the way he stepped out of the car, his usual easygoing demeanor replaced by something more serious. His eyes were set with purpose. "Hey, you two," Colton greeted, his smile still there, but a little more guarded than usual. "Mind if I come in?" "Of course," Lily said, opening the door and inviting him inside. "What's going on, Colton? You look like you've got something on your mind." Colton paused at the threshold, glancing around the cozy living room before his eyes landed on Sophie. "Actually, yes, I do have something to talk about," he said, his voice suddenly serious. Sophie felt her heart skip a beat. She knew Colton well enough to tell that whatever he was about to say wasn't going to be a casual conversation. "I've been talking to my father," Colton continued, his expression now unreadable. "He's worried about you, about both of you, and he's decided it's time for you to take a bigger step in this town." Lily looked confused, but Sophie's curiosity piqued. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice hesitant. "Tyra," Colton said, his eyes softening as he looked at Lily. "You've been working so hard, and I know you've been doing everything you can for Sophie. But my father wants to offer you an opportunity." Lily frowned. "Well, what kind of opportunity?" Colton stepped forward, handing her an envelope. It was sealed with no address, just a name written in neat formal script. "My father's offering you a job in a different city," he said. "A position at one of his hospitals. It's a big promotion, one that could change things for you and Sophie. He thinks you're ready for it, and he's willing to help you make the move." Sophie's heart raced. A new job, a chance to leave Pines where everything felt so difficult. But then she looked at Lily. She knew how much Lily had sacrificed to give Sophie the life she had now. Was this the right time? Would they really leave all of this behind? "I don't know," Colton, Lily said, her voice trembling slightly. "This is so sudden. We've just started to find our footing here." "I know," Colton replied. his voice gentle but firm. "But this could be the chance for both of you to start fresh. Sophie deserves more than this town can offer, and so do you." Sophie stood there, caught between her mother's dreams and the future that seemed so uncertain. She wasn't sure what the right answer was, but she knew one thing for sure. Whatever they decided, they would do it together.